Well, a nice addition to any home or landscape is the so-called window box. And basically it's nothing more than a type of container gardening, and there's just all kinds of shapes and sizes, and we'll show you some of those. But primarily they're in a rectangular shape, and this particular one happens to be a plastic one that's very lightweight, and of course at the bottom there's some plastic caps that you can pull off for drainage if you so choose, depending on what site you use them in. And of course optional trays. But of course it's very important to remember the soil type that you're using, and basically just a good potting soil is very important. You probably want to avoid any heavy garden soil, but a light potting soil that you can get in a bag is a nice option. Now, like so many container type practices that we use, watering is also very crucial. So that's why we try to use some of the polymers or the crystals that we've talked about before on the show. They're sold in all kinds of brands and in different colors and even a little different shapes as far as the size of the granular. But what you do is you add water to those and they expand hundreds of thousands of times their size, and they hold moisture. So when we take this mix and we put it in with our potting soil, it's going to help hold moisture, and hopefully we won't have to water as often. Now, we've already mixed some in here and it's made it nice and fluffy, and of course we'll still need to water in a little bit too. To get it to actually work a little bit better. But when you're going to design them, try to come up with various types of plants. It's always a good idea to try to have some things that are vining and a lot of foliage options too. And because so many times these are made where they're cascading, you would want to put those right in the front of the container. And what I'm putting in here now is a plant called Woodilia, and you've seen us use it last year as a bedding plant even. You can see it's very viney. It has a composite yellow type flower, and we'll just put a couple of those there right in the front so they can cascade across the front. Now, the next thing we're going to do is add a couple of plants for our flowers, and this is heliotrope, which is a very fragrant flower, and it will attract butterflies and also bees, so you don't want to hang these right by the front door. And we're making a color scheme of blue and yellow, and we're going to mix a couple of those in, and then we're going to add some more foliage in the back. Now, notice that I'm putting a little bit variation in height, and this is just Joseph's coat because it'll get pretty good size and I can trim it, and the heliotrope I can do the same thing. But obviously you're planting closer than you normally would in the garden setting. So really you can use your imagination on how you're going to do these. Then we'll need to fill in with a little bit more potting soil and of course water them in. Now, probably if I can tell you anything to look for is make sure you're matching up the same kind of plants, because if you're putting them in full sun, they need to require full sun, partial shade, that type of thing. So make sure you do your homework on those particular plants. Now, it's amazing how many different types and styles of window boxes there are. There's, of course, the traditional cedar type, and then there's even the terracotta, which are a little bit heavier. There's even the baskets now that come in recycled plastic, and you can see that Carla Smith from TLC Greenhouses in Oklahoma City made this one for us using different assortment of herbs. And you've also seen us talk about the coconut core liner, which is what is in here. Again, that's just basically a byproduct of coconut, and it's organic. Then you would put potting soil in, plant the plants in it, where here we've used sphagnum peat moss as the outer covering. Now these I would really encourage you to use the polymers in because they're going to dry out much more frequently. One of the more interesting ones that are on the market is called Flower Frames by Jay out of Ohio, and it's nothing more than really a fiberglass frame that's very lightweight. You can set gallon containers right in there or fill it with potting soil, but some of the neat characteristics are this lip that has hardware that you attach to the house or the fence or however you're going to use them, and it slips right on there. Notice too some aggregate that's already in there to allow for better drainage, plus a little cap here you can pull off for drainage, and they even have other accessories like tubing that you can run out to divert the water. So really a nice addition for some of the more interesting landscapes. Now the last one I want to show you is called Earth Box, and it's really much bigger, recycled plastic, and encouraged to use vegetables or flowers in it. The interesting thing about it, it kind of works somewhat like a hydroponic system by wicking action. So in the bottom you have a grate and a grid that has holes in it, and that holds up the potting soil off the water, which you use to fill in the bottom. And then there's also a tube here that slips down in pre-cut holes into the water, and that's how you're eventually going to water it. And if you'll notice, when I pour water in here, you'll see a little bit of water come out of the front of the hole, and that's how you know when you've put enough water in the bottom. And again, it adds a wicking action to it. Now, after you've put those pieces in and fill the bottom with water, it's time to use potting soil, and they encourage you to use a good potting soil but with some compost in it or heavier matter, because obviously if it's too fine it will fall through the grid, and ours is too fine. So we're going to kind of change or distract from the change from the rules a little bit, and we're going to use some newspaper that we're going to slip right on the top to keep our potting soil from falling through initially, and we feel like once it gets moist and it packs down a little bit, we'll be okay. But the very first thing you need to do is there's two corners that are left here, and we need to fill the soil right down in those corners with potting soil, because that's what's going to come in direct contact with the water to then wick it throughout the rest of the container. Well, once we got the container filled with our potting soil, the directions tell us to put in a little bit of complete fertilizer of some type. And so we just made a trench where we put in about 1.5 cups of fertilizer. And according to the directions, the water then will distribute the fertilizer pretty evenly as it's wicked up through the growing season, and you wouldn't have to fertilize anymore. Then we put over this plastic mulch, which is very similar to what we do right here in our studio gardens, as well as the commercial farmers. And then once we put that on pretty tight, it comes with a little plastic clip that slides right over the lip of the container and the plastic to hold it on pretty tight. And then of course really it's time to do the planting, and what we're doing is just cutting an X, just like again we do in our mulches, just enough room to barely get that transplant in there. And we're putting in some patio tomatoes, and you make a little bit of a hole, work it down in, and then try to bring soil from around the edge without making the hole bigger, because this is also to help hold in moisture, keep it from drying out, and also keep any weeds from growing in it that might be in. Now look, you've got plenty of room, so you could put in some lettuce, radishes, other things until the tomatoes get bigger. They're great for flowers. And really there's just about no excuse anymore for those of you living in apartments and condominiums. You know, this is a perfect way to do some container gardening, and probably more likely to be used on a patio instead of hanging on a windowsill. But check your garden center. There's plenty of options out there on things to use.